Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Community Marriage Initiative Fund's first training event. And for those of you who I haven't had the opportunity to meet, my name is Katie Ray, and I'm with Marriage Initiative, which many of us have known as Sammy over the years. Thank you all for joining us here today. I know that we have individuals on the call from all across the United States, from up in Washington State to down in Central Arkansas and all the way to California over to Florida. You know, we are truly covering a lot of ground with this movement and serving marriages. And we are just so humbled to be walking alongside you all on this journey, you know, as you give selflessly of your time and your talent towards this very important mission. So before we get started today with
Jeremy from Grace Marriage.
What's that? I'm sorry. Well, I'll just continue. But if one thing I did want to mention, if there are any questions, we are going to have a Q&A towards the end. So if you guys could stick around past the 1 o'clock hour, we will have some time for some Q&A. So before we get started with our speakers, I wanted to welcome Mr. Bob Rauscher with the Greater Charlotte Marriage Initiative, and he will be opening us in prayer today. So Bob, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you. Hey, everybody. Let me lead us in just a word of prayer before we get started. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this opportunity to gather, for the work that has come out of Sammy, from Dennis, and the opportunity we have to really highlight marriages all across the country. God, it's more than marriage, though. It's about discipleship, about looking more like your son. And I pray, God, that as we continue to initiate this effort across the country, God, that in fact it would change lives in amazing ways, where people would come to look more like your son, and the message of the gospel would be spread. Be with us today as we have this time together. We love you, God, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for your beautiful words. Okay, so let me unhighlight you, Bob, because let's see. Yeah. There we go. Well, it's not allowing me to unhighlight you, but once I highlight Jason, I know you'll, so I apologize for that. So first on our agenda for today, we have two of the team members from the Central Arkansas Marriage Initiative, or CAMI, as some of you may know them, Mr. Jason Ancarrow and Mark Ellis, and they will be presenting on their 11-step process for building church connections. So Jason, and I think you're gonna go first, so let me highlight you. Let's see.
Stoica is having a workshop.
There we go.
All right, there it is. Okay. Well, hey everybody. My name is Jason Ancarrow. As Katie stated, I'm the director of the Central Arkansas Marriage Initiative, and this is great. This is cool doing this for being a part of it and doing this and being able to share some just high level best practice. These are more guideline kind of things that we've noted as we've been moving forward in this initiative and connecting with the church. And so we just want to make sure before we start is just keep perspective, I think is a big one. We're working to create, a movement. And this takes time. Movement takes time. And we're doing this working through the church. And my background is in pastoral ministry. So I wanted to take just a couple minutes and highlight a couple of things that may give you a little insight into a pastor's head and heart, because I know gaining these meetings is great, especially when you consider the pastor as a leader. But just keep in mind that pastors are people like you and me, right? They have lives outside of the church. They have families. They have struggles. They have real stuff going on in their life, and some of them even have marital struggles going on. There's just a lot going on in their lives and there's a lot going on in our lives, right? And so we can all relate in that way. But a pastor is basically on call 24/7, and he feels this and he knows this, and so ministry, it's hard to separate family life from ministry. Another big thing, the pastor is the ordained leader, and he feels and knows that. I mean, it is a literal mantle of responsibility, a weight placed on his shoulders that he feels and knows until he's no longer in the ministry. Leadership in general is hard, but spiritual leadership for your congregation and community is a whole different ballgame. Pastors are in ministry, but they can't do everything, and they know that. They know that intimately. There's a lot of good things to be involved in, a lot of things that they can move forward in ministry in, but they can't do it all. And most churches are doing good to just maintain where they are right now. And adding one more thing just seems like out of the question. However, they want to include what is best for their congregation and their community. And we all know that marriage ministry probably could be the best thing to make sure your church is built on foundationally. 3 things about churches that they're looking for: more people coming to faith, more people attending church, and more people giving of their time and treasure to the kingdom. And we believe that marriage ministry, a thriving marriage ministry, will meet at least one of those for every church that you connect with. I'm going to share screen real quick. So moving on to the 10 pieces, and again, these are just guidelines, best practice things we've come up with. The first one is do some research. Quick research. It doesn't take a lot of time, just a quick Google search of your area and what marriage ministry is already going on. And that's who you connect with first, whether it's in a church or maybe even an outside organization that can connect you into a church. Find out what's already going on and moving forward in your area. And that's a low-hanging fruit. Go after that first, because those are going to be some pretty easy wins for you. The second one, bring somebody with you. If for no other reason, this eases tension and eases pressure on your part. It's always better to have somebody else with you, if nothing else, just for that mental, moral support. Mm-hmm. Even better if they know what you're talking about and you can kind of play off of each other in the conversation. So find somebody, bring them with you. If you need to coach them up a little bit, do that. And then if they're at a point, if they're not really sure what to say, just give them something to say. You know, hey, at this point, I'm going to look at you and this is what I want you to say. And it'll always help you going forward in those meetings. Plan the steps that you will take in the conversation. Make sure you get the big picture kind of things across. Paint a picture for these leaders you're meeting with. What is a marriage initiative? Why is it important? What will it do? Big picture wise, but also what will it do for their church? Be concise in your delivery. Be concise in your delivery. Be concise in your delivery. Don't spin your wheels. Don't waste their time, and make sure that they know that you know what you're talking about, which may mean that you have to practice what you say, and that's okay. As it relates to the grant process, in every meeting you are in, do the ask. Ask them to fill out the paper. Ask them to sign the letter, either right then today, or just tell them, you know, you'll come back to them, but make sure in every meeting that is a key action step for the grant. Fourth one, form relationships. And this is big. This is, if there was nothing else that you hear today, this is probably the most important. Form relationships. Ask good questions. Listen really well when they answer those questions, and even take notes. If you have to do it right there in front of them, just let them know that's what you're doing. You want to make sure you hear them well, so you're taking notes. Find out who is the best person in their church to connect with on marriage ministry, and ask them to make that connection for you. The last thing we want to do is have pastors feel extra burden who are asking them to do something else. So if they can offload that to somebody else, trust me, they'll be more than happy to do it. And if they don't have anybody, that's part of the process, is helping them to identify somebody. Make sure that you let them know you're not asking them to join your thing. This is not your thing. You are asking them and letting them know that you're there to help them. And that is key. And that relieves a lot of burden. You want to help them form or build their marriage ministry, and you want to help them promote what's going on. And then give them an action step. When it's time to leave, make sure they can walk away with something, say where they can go before the next time you meet. For us, we give each pastor we meet with a copy of this book, Endgame, which is a great resource. Check it out if you don't know anything about it. If nothing else, get them to commit to praying about where they're going to go in their marriage ministry. Mark?
Thank you, Jason. And it's so wonderful to be able to hear the process from a pastor's perspective. So thank you for that. And now Mark Ellis, someone who's been really serving in the marriage space, I think for nearly 30 years. And Mark is going to touch on the remaining impactful steps of Cammie's process. So Mark, you have the floor.
Thank you, Katie. I am Mark Ellis and have been in the marriage space since 1995, along with my wife, Michelle, who is joining on this call. We've spent all of that time really working with family life, and that's where we learned a lot of the things that we do, whether it's related to family life ministry or Central Arkansas Marriage Initiative Ministry. But Jason did share some good tips for how to get to know a pastor, how to engage with a pastor. And those are things you might not have known, but the things I'm going to mention, most likely you already know. You may not put them in an order, you may not know you're doing them, but they are important steps to being successful, really, with putting together your grant application. And these are the steps we followed. And I think it's something that Michelle and I learned really promoting Weekend to Remembers. We put together a lot of these things and they worked extremely well. So start with relationships you already have or know. Pastors, marriage leaders, those that you know that are in the marriage space, even if they don't know you're looking to start a local initiative, this is an opportunity for you to begin to connect with them and tell them the plan. Set times to visit, days of the week, hours of the day. We have found that it's better to visit on Tuesdays and Thursdays for introduction meetings. Oftentimes Monday and Friday will either be a day off for a staff member, or it could even be a time when their team gets together to meet and they are focused. Wednesdays can be good days, but oftentimes if a church has a service that evening, the pastor comes in late and he's focused on that service rather than something coming in from the outside. So figure out the best days to have those meetings and stick to that. Map out the area that you're going to approach, whether you're going to churches or organizations. You may be meeting with individuals, but look at where the churches are on the map and see what you can do in a given period of time to maximize not only the time that you're spending, but also the opportunities that you're having to connect with people along the way. And then knowing that you won't necessarily get meetings just one after another, plan to introduce yourself to churches along the way. I think this is one thing that Michelle and I learned as we were promoting the Weekend to Remember conferences. We would go to churches that we had relationships with, but if we had appointments scheduled, we might have time in between two churches. So we would go along and just stop into churches, introduce ourselves if we didn't have a relationship, and leave them some information. It was a great way to start forming a relationship and let them know what was going on. And usually after a couple of more trips to that area, we would be able to connect with them and maybe even have a sit-down meeting. And then finally, have something to leave. One of the things that we have done is we use these door hanger bags with the weekend to remember, to leave a brochure and some information about ourselves and to connect with people. We've just repurposed that for CAMI reasons. Get collaterals that you can put together and use, something that tells about your ministry and what you're doing. We have a card that we've developed that is actually explaining to a pastor what a marriage champion church is and what a marriage champion looks like, that we go over this card with them and even talk to them about best practices, what it looks like to become a marriage champion church. This is, we've put this on a Vistaprint laminated card. So it's a thing they can keep on their desk and use over and over as a reference piece. And I think that's helpful because one of the things that we see when we go back and visit is something's laying on their desk that we've given them, or it's on their bookshelf. We've given it to them, and we know that they see that as something highly important to the process we're engaging in. Also, we have our business cards, got those printed up. That's good to have to leave with them. It identifies you with your marriage initiative work. And then we even had some pins printed up that puts the name in front of them even one more time. But these things show that you are serious. This is a real thing that is forming, and it really puts some weight behind it. Now, I know Katie mentioned that we have 11 steps. I can only find 10 on the sheet. And I don't know if Jason knocked one off of there, but the 11th step is have fun, and you will do well in this process.
Well, thank you, Jason and Mark, and I apologize, and we will keep that 11th step on there because that is a very important part of it. So thank you, Jason and Mark. And as I mentioned, we will be having a Q&A following the training event where our attendees will have time to ask the speakers questions, because I know some of you probably have follow-up questions for these guys. Okay, next we have Mr. Carl Caton, and Mr. Carl Caton is the president and founder of Marriage Initiative, and he will be speaking on the topic of starting where your passion is and serving that role. So Carl, whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'm unmuted and ready. It's let me get this out of the way. So it's so great to see everybody. Mark, it's fun to follow you. For everybody on the call, I want you to know that Mark Ellis has been such an important part of our journey here. Mark has helped us every step along the way. He is a fountain of wisdom and information. Mark, thank you so much. And thanks for all that you've contributed to our mission. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of beyond the senior pastor. What are some other roles that you can engage with? Because as Jason said, and as we all know, senior pastors are really busy. And if they're our only point of contact, sometimes that can be kind of limiting. And so I want to explore with you in my time, what are some other relationships and other methods that we can use? What have we done here in San Antonio that's been really helpful? When we think about building relationships in church, we think of three perspectives: top down, sides in, and bottom up. Top down, sides in, and bottom up. And what I mean by that is, you know, the traditional route of building relationships from churches is to do a top-down approach, to meet the senior pastor and to work down through the hierarchical structure to build more relationships in church. And that can be really effective. But also, I think there's also many opportunities to approach churches differently. And one is a sides-in approach. You know, we know that at all these churches, there are lots of different people in staff positions. These are mid-level leaders in churches, positions like women's ministry leader or a pastoral care leader. Maybe it's a young marriage leader or even an executive pastor. These are other positions that are really common in churches. And these are what we call a side-in approach, kind of like a side door approach. How can you reach the church through these very different relationships? One of the things that we know is these are very dynamic leaders. They tend to be more accessible than the senior pastor. They're certainly more available. And often, I think it's really important to note that they are often closer to the need. They're much more in tune with what's happening in marriages, especially, and I'm going to have to get an amen on this, especially women's ministry leaders, right? Women's ministry leaders, they are very much in touch with what is going on in the marriages and in the relationships of the church. There's no one that understands that better. And so if you begin with a side-in approach, that allows you then to work in the hierarchical structure, to move up in the structure, have an introduction to the senior pastor just to make sure you build a connection there, and then to move down, to have a staff member at a church invite you to meet maybe a lay couple or a group of lay couples that want to lead the marriage ministry in the church. You know, the mid-level, this mid-level leader is a more natural, more long-term relationship. It's a relationship that can last for years. Again, they're more available to us and more accessible to us. So we've said, you know, we can start from the top down, we can start from the sides in, but we can also begin from the bottom up. And that means reaching out and connecting with lay couples. These are these very passionate people who, because of their life and their story, have a unique desire to serve marriages. They sometimes when I think of these lay couples, they have an unquenchable energy. They have so much energy for it because it comes from a personal passion that they have. Starting with lay couples allows you to work more deeply with them. It helps you help them form their vision for what their marriage ministry can be like, or how it could grow. It helps you work with them to share best practices around strategy. You can have opportunities to coach them, but it allows you also to move upward in the organization, to have them introduce you to a mid-level leader, maybe a pastoral care leader or a women's ministry leader, and ultimately to win the support of the senior pastor, because we know that marriage ministry is only effective if you have that support of the senior leader. So you have your strategy. These are strategies on how to engage and build relationships. Now, how do you find names? This is from the sales world. We call this prospecting. How do you find a list of names that you can begin to reach out to? Well, we've already talked about, you know, doing some good old-fashioned internet search. Go to the church website, look through the staff directory, see who's on staff at the church, do some search to see if maybe they do have a marriage ministry. Most of them don't. But another way, a more strategic way to do research is to look through the directory of local facilitators for Prepare, Enrich, and SYMBIS. Now, I know you all are real familiar with Prepare, Enrich, and SYMBIS. There's over 100,000 Prepare, Enrich facilitators around the world. There's, you know, many SYMBIS facilitators. What's really interesting is when you go to the Prepare, Enrich website and you do a zip code search, you'll find a list of names of people who are certified as facilitators. What's interesting is that most of these people are actually on staff at a church because they were assigned to do marriage preparation and they wanted to equip themselves a little bit better. These people I find to be very motivated towards marriage because they've gone the extra mile, they've taken the extra step. And so they can be a really valuable resource to you as you want to prospect for names. Also, remember that when you start reaching out to Prepare, Enrich facilitators, a lot of times these people know one another in the city. Sometimes it's a cohort. It's a group of people who maybe have informal relationships, and there's ways of bringing them together to better get to know one another so that they can build more relationships as well. Now, so we've talked about the strategy of how you do that. One of the things that we have found in San Antonio that is most effective is that to build relationships is most effective when we start by serving. One of the things that we know with all these prospective names is that they all have needs. These people have needs. They're passionate about serving marriages, but they're also isolated. Sometimes they're very alone in their work, and all of them have needs. So in San Antonio, we create lunch and learn events, real simple lunch events where we provide free sandwiches and drinks. We bring people together and we address topics that, again, address the needs that people have. It's always a great opportunity for people to come together, to encourage each other, to learn from one another, to find resources, to build connections. And I think if we think about San Antonio, the one thing we've done better than anything is to facilitate a process where people learn from one another. When we gather people together, we're not the featured speaker. We're not the hero. They're the hero. They are the featured speakers. We work hard to elevate them as a go-to source. And that's been really effective for us. A lot of times we do events based on the season of the year, like during divorce season. That's a real critical time where people have needs. We do things during wedding season because people have staff members at churches are preparing for weddings. And those always a need. They always kind of want to get current on what's the latest. But here's what's most valuable about that time together is that when you bring people together, when they're coming to you rather than you going to them, when they're coming to you, you start with a relationship on equal footing. And I think that is so key about the relationship is that you begin the relationship on equal footing because you need them and they need you, right? And starting a relationship on equal footing is a way to create a deep level of mutual understanding, of respect, and trust. And we find that when we host these events, when we host these lunch and learn events, it supercharges relationships because the pastors and the staff members and the lay couples come to us and we're serving a need. And because we're serving a need, that is a really great way to begin opening these relationships. So those are some of the things we've learned in San Antonio, and I'll turn it back to you, Katie.
Thank you, Carl. Beautifully said. And we certainly have a lot of passionate people around the room and around cities across the US. Okay, next I'd like to introduce Mr. Jerry Angelo, who is among many titles, he wears many hats, but he is the founder and president of Vanguard Marriage and Family Advocates in Springfield, Missouri. And today, Jerry will be presenting on finding connections in the broader context of your community. So Jerry, whenever you're ready.
Great. Well, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say thanks to Katie and Carl and Dennis. You guys are doing an amazing job. Keep up the good work. We're all appreciative of what you do, and you're so kind and helpful to all of us. I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of all of us. And anytime you give a pastor the microphone like this, I just wanted to warn you that you're going to get a 3 to 5 point sermon for sure. And Carl, you said what, about 50 minutes? Oh, sorry, 5 or 10. Okay, we'll try to keep it to that. But as Katie said, I'm the co-founder of Vanguard Marriage and Family Advocates, and our goal is to strengthen and encourage marriages and families. And one of the ways that we do that is by creating a movement to empower leaders to come together in our culture and to help them significantly reduce the divorce rate. That's one of our big goals. And when they asked me to comment today on finding connections in the broader context of our community, I thought it would be good to talk about being present on purpose and how that can help cultivate relationships with pastors, church leaders, community leaders, business leaders, etc. So I'm going to run through maybe some quick experiences that I believe have helped to bring me to where I am today, and I wanted to share the screen to help illustrate that a little bit. And all right, are you guys seeing the picture there?
Yes.
Okay, good. Let's see. Well, my wife and I, as I said, we've been doing marriage ministry, and we've been doing that for about 15 years now. It's been an amazing journey that the Lord has blessed us with. You know, a few years back, in my conversations with the Lord, I asked him, how could I be more effective in our ministry? And he spoke to my heart and he told me about the elements of prayer and how they enhance our ability to do relationship. For example, when you're praying to the Lord, I believe there's three basic elements. There's the element of thanksgiving, where we're thanking the Lord for all that he's done for us. Another element is forgiveness, where we're asking him to forgive us for how we've all fallen short of his glory. And then, of course, there's the blessing element, where we're asking, for him to bless us in a particular way to do his will. And when the Lord kind of spoke to my heart in that area, he's like, that's how those elements are what help to foster our relationship. And those very same elements are things that you can do in your earthly relationships. Not that we pray to other people, that we can be thankful for other people, we can forgive them and receive their forgiveness. We can also bless them whenever they're in need. And so when meeting with couples, one of the first things that we do is I talk about how the Lord reveals his vision and purpose for their marriage through prayer. As you begin to strengthen your relationship with the Lord, he reveals his vision and purpose, and not only in your unique individual relationship and in your life, but also in the purpose of your marriage. So we started teaching couples how to pray in our marriage ministry, and that led to leading other prayer events. Somehow we got connected with the governor's state of Oklahoma, and he sent an entourage to DC. I got invited to go. We had an impromptu prayer meeting on the Capitol Mall there on the lawn. We helped them with Oklahoma Prayer Fest. The Lord said, you need to do that in Missouri. We started doing that. And then we began leading prayer for state officials and legislators at the Capitol. And that's kind of what I put here in this picture is, this started out as marriage ministry. And,
You're talking about in the walkers.
I'm not sure. Oh, somebody might not be needed there, but we started out doing marriage ministry, and again, the Lord pressed upon my heart the importance of prayer. And if you can see there, there's several governors in that picture, where I would have never thought in my wildest dreams that I would be able to lay hands over them and pray a blessing and over those great, wonderful, godly men. Been able to share a meal with them. And talk about what the Lord put on my heart for my vision and purpose for the state of Oklahoma, for the state of Missouri, and just been an amazing opportunity that the Lord has taken me on, just by being obedient. And so, last week I was on the Missouri State National Day of Prayer Board. Governor Parson was there. We were able to pray with him. He was one of the guests. And when they were done, they basically appointed me to start leading that next year. And first off, this is all the Lord's glory. I couldn't have done any of this without him and his leading. But that probably wouldn't have happened if I didn't do Missouri Prayer Fest, where the chairman asked me to help him do National Day of Prayer. Missouri Prayer Fest probably wouldn't have happened if I didn't invest my own time and finances to go to DC. That DC trip probably wouldn't have happened if I didn't make an effort to go and connect with Governor Stitt whenever he got elected. That meeting probably wouldn't have happened if I haven't invested in a marriage event where I invited the Stitt family. I mean, I could go on and on about how over the years the Lord has taken us on a journey and how it's all connected. Even last week, I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to attend 2 National Day of Prayer events that were 3 hours away from each other. I had to run from one to the other. Where I was on the board, but the reason why I'm telling you this is it was important for me to be there. It was important for me to be obedient to the Lord and yield to him, because when we yield to the Lord's obedience, he provides favor and blessing, and he did not disappoint. I didn't want to get up that early. I would have rather slept in, taken a boat ride on the lake, but I chose to be obedient to the Lord, and I just can't tell you how important it is to just be present and in person sometimes. That's where relationship happens, in the presence of one another. Just like with the Lord through prayer, presence builds trust. That's how relationships is strengthened. And just make sure that whatever you're doing, some people say we do too much, but I always try to make sure that purpose is in it. Even going through all these things, I'm constantly reminded that all the time, all the effort, all the finances, it's truly worth it when you honor the Lord's calling. He honors you and blesses you back when his purposes are fulfilled through a willing vessel. So how do you do all this? How do you do all this in the context of ministry and connecting with other pastors and leaders? You got to do your research. You got to make the phone calls. You got to go to the events. You got to visit with local pastors and business leaders. You have to go to where they are. It starts with an introduction, maybe a handshake, and then later it's a wave when you see them at an event. Maybe you go visit their church and that turns into lunch. Then next thing you know, a relationship is forming and they're crossing a room to discuss an important matter with you. But none of this can happen if you don't go. And when the Lord says go, you go. Be patient. Relationship takes time because they're built on trust. And you also have to consider that you only have a finite amount of time, energy, and finances. So be sure that you use your resources wisely. This is why purpose is so important, because you don't want to do everything, just what is within your God-given vision and purpose. And when I look back in the early days, I remember sitting on my comfy leather couch, binge watching Netflix and relaxing without much to worry about. I could have continued being comfortable, but then I wouldn't have been able to operate in the center of God's will and really accomplish the goals of the purpose that I was created for. You know, I believe that God created us in such a way that in order to have purpose, we have to go outside of ourselves to serve others. And that is the key to being completely fulfilled in the Lord. No closer place to that than within a marital relationship. And that can start with you, with me. So when you go out into the world for the purposes of your ministry, don't just go through the motions. Question yourself, why am I doing this and for what purpose? We do that all the time with my wife. I'm like, we're doing on our way to something really important. We know it's important. And I'm like, why are we doing this? And we talk about it and we remind ourselves that we're sure that this is within our vision and purpose. And we use that as an encouragement to help us complete the task that the Lord has set before me. And I wanted to end my time with the scripture. Our culture is crazy. The enemy is fierce. He wants to kill, steal, and destroy what we're doing. So I wanted to end with this to encourage you. It's Joshua 1:9. It's one of my favorites. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And if anybody has any questions later, I'd be glad to answer. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Jerry. And I apologize for the 10-minute window. I know we would, love to hear you speak for much longer. And just to let you all know, if you become friends with Jerry, he does have a boat. So we don't live in the same state, but we have been invited, and I'm sure he would invite you too if you live a little bit closer. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, now we will invite Mr. Dennis Stoica to the stage. And as most of you know Dennis, he is the founder and one of the funders of the CMI Fund, and really one of just the most respected leaders in the relationship and marriage education field. And today, Dennis will be speaking on building relationships with your local archdiocese. So Dennis, whenever you're ready.
Great. Thanks, Katie. So thanks to the speakers that have gone before me and for everybody participating in the call. So yeah, I really want to talk about working within the framework of the Catholic Church. And if you look at by the numbers, I just did a quick search this morning in terms of religious denominations in the US. And interesting enough, according to the search, there are actually about twice as many Protestants in the US as there are Catholics. They say about 42% of the population is Protestant and 21% are Catholics. But when you look then within denominations, it's interesting enough because according to a 2012 review by the National Council of Churches, the 5 largest denominations, the largest denomination is the Catholic Church with 68 million people. The second largest is Southern Baptist Convention at 16 million. Below that, it falls off to United Methodists at about 8, Mormons at around 6, and Church of God in Christ, COGIC, around 5.5. So if you look at that fall off between Catholics, 68 million, and Southern Baptists at 16, and then United Methodists around 8, there is quite a fall off behind it. So they are a large group of people. And often when we look at community marriage initiatives, oftentimes the Catholics are kind of left out, that it becomes like a Protestant movement, and yet the largest denomination is kind of left on the sidelines. So the question becomes, well, how do you engage them? That's what we really want to talk about here. First, the good news is there is a tremendous alliance of interest, meaning that Catholics have a strong tradition around marriage. And so phraseology that is very common in working with Catholics is they'll talk about the sanctity of marriage. They talk about the sacrament of marriage. This is a big deal within the Catholic framework. And so, they're very tempted to resonate with your value around marriage. And one of the things that's kind of cool about the Catholic Church, they actually have a mandatory requirement throughout the United States that everybody that gets married in the Catholic Church has to go through a substantive marriage preparation program before they can get married in the Catholic Church. And the typical guideline is that they must actually approach their local parish at least 6 months before the wedding date. And if you think what's common in many Protestant denominations, it's hey, we've decided to get married, and who's able to marry us on the time frame. And so the Catholics have that different perspective, that they expect the preparation, they expect the planning that goes into it. They do take it very seriously. I found Carl's structure in terms of 3 ways to look at things, a top down, a sides in, and a bottom up. And I think we kind of stretch that analogy even with working within Catholic diocese and archdiocese. So one approach is you can take a top down approach, that is going in at a centralized location and try to use that for leverage point. And from that, as I mentioned, there's a requirement within all Catholic dioceses that there must be marriage preparation. I should point out the way that the Catholic Church is organized across the United States is they're broken up into geographies, and each geography is covered either by a diocese or an archdiocese, and the difference simply is that of size. The larger geography or larger population will have archdiocese. Smaller will typically have diocese. And here in the state of Florida, I believe, going by memory, I think there's 8 dioceses or archdioceses spread throughout the state of Florida. Some smaller states only have 1 or 2 dioceses in them. And so if you want to find your connection point within a diocese, oftentimes they'll have an office called Office of Marriage and Family Life, or sometimes it's called Office of Family Life. The way to find that is go onto their website and look. You can look for marriage ministries, or you can look for marriage preparation. Remember, marriage preparation is a requirement. And so whatever office has the requirement to administer marriage preparation is the one that will typically have all the marriage ministries within them. So you can reach out to that person and share what your vision is and what your passion is. Now, here's what's interesting. That person really has little, if any, power within the diocese. They may have influence, but they don't have power. And so it's not like they can force a pastor to meet with you if the pastor doesn't want to, okay? But they can be a gatekeeper. They can be influential. And so if you align with them and they get to know that you're a safe person, then they can make introductions for you. However, it's not a requirement. So you could try to go in from that diocesan level by working with that person. When you do that, what I suggest, though, is it's the same approach you do with Protestants, is that you find out, what are they doing? What are they passionate about? How can you come alongside them and serve them? So everything that you would do at a local church level works, whether that church is a Protestant church or a Catholic church, and it works at a diocesan level. So what are they doing and how can you serve them? The second point is that you can also reach out at a local parish level. And find out what priests are passionate about marriage. And the reality is this: most pastors and priests are actually passionate about marriage. They've just got, like, as was stated before, so many things going on, they're stretched too thin to be able to take it on as a major focus. So if you can show them how you can come alongside them to assist them and their people, they'll very likely resonate. Now, some people ask me, he says, what are the major doctrinal differences between Catholics and Protestants? And I would say doctrine, there's about a 90% alignment between Protestants and Catholics. And in fact, there's more disparity, I'd say, within the Protestant world, Protestant churches, between it, than there is across Catholic and Protestant. But here's the one way to look at it is you look at the chapter of Ephesians 5. And we would say this, is that oftentimes you'll hear pastors start with Ephesians 5. They'll talk about Ephesians 5:22, which starts with women, submit to your husbands. When the Catholics preach on that text, they will almost always start with the previous verse, which is 5:21, which is, in all things, submit to each other. And therefore, wives, submit to your husbands. And then it go, husbands, love your wives. So while some fundamental Protestants I've worked with have kind of looked at that male, women submit to the husbands, that kind of absence in the Catholic tradition. The Catholic tradition, it really is mutual submission, starting with 5:21. And so I say that just from as you're working with people, just to be kind of aware of that. Right. I also want to point out is that many dioceses have one or two or three of the following ministries that are out there. And so these are national ministries. One is for marriage preparation. There's a program called Engaged Encounter. For marriage enrichment, there's Marriage Encounter. And for troubled marriages, there's Retrovi. So you want to be looking for those programs out there, because guess what? Lay people that are passionate about marriage in the Catholic faith will typically, not always, but will often be volunteering at one of those three. And so it's a good place to come alongside people and be promoting where their passions are. Also want to point out that the CMI fund that you're familiar with stands for the Community Marriage Initiative Fund. There's actually a sister definition of CMI fund called the Catholic Marriage Initiative Fund. And they are, that organization has the same funders as the Community Marriage Initiative Fund. And they are providing funds to dioceses to help them implement a national pastoral framework that was voted on last year. It's called, if you can see the screen, Call to the Joy of Love, National Pastoral Framework for Marriage and Family Life Ministry. Now, the website for the Catholic version of the CMI fund is catholicmarriagefund.org. And if you go to that website, you'll see a description of the Catholic Marriage Initiatives Fund. And it is designed to empower the local diocese to help implement that national pastoral framework. National pastoral framework was voted upon by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. So it's a way to empower them. And so one of the things you can actually do as you're working with the local churches is let them know that you're familiar with the National Pastoral Framework. Let them know about you can tell them that, hey, we've got funding, those of you that already have, from the Community Marriage Initiative Fund. And you can encourage them to look into funding from the Catholic Marriage Initiative Fund. And the Catholic CMI Fund is something that actually has got the sign off of the Catholic bishops. There was a conference of Catholic bishops 3 months ago, and Archbishop Cordileone from San Francisco shared on it. This week, there is a flyer being sent out literally to all the bishops across the United States by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops promoting the Catholic CMI Fund. So just want to share that there is a great alignment of it, and this is a way that you can serve. And I am now 11 and a half minutes into my 10-minute allotment, so I'm going to pass it back to Carl.
Thank you, Dennis, and it's always wonderful to hear your words of wisdom. So before we wrap up our training event, I will hand it back over to Carl to touch on understanding natural motivations.
Thank you, Dennis, and that was really amazing. We always appreciate your leadership and insight. And if you don't know yet, Dennis is known around the country. He's a National Smart Marriage Award winner from 2008, and we're so grateful to have him in this mission. As we're kind of closing today, I really want us just to focus on the fact that in all the different ways that we build relationships, it's so important that we understand what are the natural motivations of the different people that we engage, that we're building relationships with. You know, there is a guy named Rich Harwood who is a community strategist, and he's been very successful at bringing people together around common mission around the country. And Rich always talks about this idea of when we're doing work in communities to be outward facing. And another way to say that is to be others centered. And one of the best ways to be others centered is to acknowledge and elevate the role that each of us play, and also to understand that inside of each of the roles that we play, we're all driven by different natural motivations. We know that senior pastors, one of their highest motivations may not be marriage. It is typically going to be discipleship and evangelism. Certainly they care about marriage, but it's great to interact with people, interact with pastors to help them understand the importance of marriage in the context of what is their highest natural motivations. As we think about working with people, one of the things I wanted to share here is that we're not trying to get them on board with what we're doing. We're not trying to get them on board with our thing. What we're trying to do is to empower them to fully embrace their calling. What's the unique calling that they have to serve marriages that respect the natural motivations that they have? We know, again, as we said, senior pastors are motivated by discipleship and evangelism. Staff member at churches, their natural motivations typically are to run healthy, vibrant programs. And when you're starting to talk to the lay couples, certainly their highest motivation is to interact directly with marriages. But what about business leaders? You know, business leaders, their highest motivation is to run a successful business. But they also know that in running a successful business, you've got to take care of your employees, and the relational health and wellness of their employees is important to that. So starting with the natural motivations that each of us have is a great way to honor people and honor the unique role that they play. Sometimes we lament that people don't engage. We're always frustrated when people don't engage with our collective mission. But the truth is that most often people don't engage because we don't address the unique role that they play. So it's important to think about our work from an empowerment perspective. How can we empower senior pastors to do what they can uniquely do in their highest and best role? How can we empower these mid-level church leaders to do what they can uniquely do in their highest and best role? How can we empower counselors to be more involved in what's happening around the city? How can we empower lay couples? When you think about empowerment, there's essentially three things that we have to know. Is that we have to give people a role model, a roadmap, and a series of steps. To empower people, you've got to give them a role model. A role model is essential because we're human beings, and human beings are herd animals. And the thing about people is they take social cues from one another. When you give someone a role model, someone who's doing this at the highest level, people can look at that person and say, I can do that. Having a role model is what helps people form vision. That's essential to empowerment, is to give them vision of what their contribution could look like. The second thing that we have to do is give them a roadmap. A roadmap gives them a clear direction of where we're going. What is it that we're calling you to do? Why is it important that you take the trip? People don't engage until they make a decision to engage. And they make a decision to engage when you give them a clear direction, a clear roadmap of where they're going and why it's important to take the trip. The last thing we have to do to empower people is to give them a series of steps, a role model, a roadmap, and a series of steps. What is a series of steps that each of us can take to grow more effective and to grow more deeply in what is our own highest and best role? Most often people don't engage when the first step that you give them is too big of a step, or if it seems overwhelming. So think about the people that you want to engage in your process in your community. Think about what are the unique steps that each of them can take, and give them a series of steps that's both natural and progressive, and also taps into their personal natural motivations. So thank you, Katie. I'm going to hand it back to you.
Well, thank you, Carl, and thank you all again for joining us here today. And a big thank you to our guest speakers. I know that you all have very busy schedules in both your personal and professional lives. So please know how much we appreciate your willingness to take the time to prepare for this event today. And then to all of our attendees, we hope that you enjoyed the training and that it was beneficial to you and your team of marriage champions back at home. And this was actually the first of many trainings. We are planning to have one each month. We haven't scheduled the date and time for our one in June, but it does seem like Fridays during the lunch hour. And I know we're in different time zones, but it seems like this time does work for the majority of the people. So we may end up keeping it around this time. And as soon as we do schedule a time and date in June, I will send it out to everyone on this call. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we did want to end with a Q&A session for anyone that had questions for our speakers today. So, we of course understand that it is in the middle of the workday. So if you are not able to stay, we will be posting the entire training video on our YouTube page following the event. So you can certainly watch any part that you missed today. So we'll go ahead and get started with our Q&A. And what we would like to do for the Q&A, if you could just simply raise your hand virtually on your screen. If you'd like to, you can raise your actual hand, but then your arm may get tired after a while. So you can raise your virtual hand on your screen, and I'll try and hopefully get around to everyone to answer their questions. So it looks like we already have a question from Ian Keene, and he's with Live the Life. And so Ian, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, you have the floor.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Katie. My question was directed a little bit towards Mark Ellis. I saw your wonderful kit there, and dealing with some of these communities, they're very leery of outsiders because they're very small rural communities. Have you found a lot of success using those little door hangers to help bridge that initial gap?
Well, most of what we've used with Cami has been handed to them. So it's been connected to a conversation. What we found with the Weekend to Remember is we put those door hangers out there when we didn't catch someone at the church. Sometimes we would hear back from someone, they would send us an email or give us a call. But more often than not, what would happen is the next time that we connected with that church and we caught somebody there, somebody might be likely to remember the fact that we left that information there. So, I think that is one of those things that is part of that old marketing information, that it takes like 7 impressions before somebody catches on. So that's the philosophy behind that, so that you're putting something out there. It's a very cost-effective way of doing it because those resources don't cost that much to produce, and you can easily leave those there, and you never know when that'll pick up and lead to an actual conversation.
And also, we had a sorry we missed you card that we'd put in, and I would follow up immediately with an email, usually before we left the church. If I could find an email address on the church's website, say, hey, we came by today, we'd like to connect with you.
Well, we have not done that yet with Cami.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for your question, Ian. Let's see, Joan and Ron with Fresno, California. Go ahead with your question. Oh, I think you're on mute. There you go. Oh, let's see.
Here we
There
go.
you go. Now
Okay.
we're
Sorry.
kicking.
I think Carl mentioned the luncheon that you would have, lunch and learn. Can you say a little bit more about that? And do people pay for that, or do you guys kind of sponsor that? And then is it like, how do you lead that luncheon? Because you mentioned it being more of a group function of people sharing.
Yeah, so thank you, Ron and Joan. Yeah, so we typically have done quarterly luncheons. They're lunch and learns. We call them roundtable events. We typically have a seasonal theme. So we will do a lunch and learn in January to address divorce season. It's top of mind for a lot of people in churches where a lot of things are happening with struggling couples. So we always talk about divorce season, and we talk about restoring marriages. And then in April, we talk about wedding season. So we're talking about, what can you do to prepare couples for marriage? So we always try to tap into the natural seasons. In the fall, we usually do something on enrichment. And then before Christmas, we do a lot of times a theme called Reconnect at Christmas, because families are thinking forward about reconnecting. Couples that are kind of struggling are hoping that there might be a chance that they'll reconnect during Christmas. So we try to tap into the natural things that are happening. The other thing that we do is that we typically do an all-church postcard. So we have about 1,200 churches in the city. That gives us a chance just to send a postcard to every church in the city 3 to 4 times a year. This is all pre-COVID, but that kind of gets our name in front of them again, reminds them. It always brings people out of the woodwork. So that's always real helpful. And the last thing is that we're there to facilitate learning. We want to create value. I cannot tell you how important it is to create value. We hammer this with our team again and again and again. People take time from their busy schedules. They travel across our community. They show up for a free lunch. They have to travel back. Sometimes counselors will cancel an appointment in order to be there. We have to create value. We create value by facilitating valuable conversations. We find people who are the best in practice in our city. We curate them well. We have a terminology called 10 to 1. And so if we're going to have 40 minutes of conversation, we want to prepare for that 400 minutes. So we do a lot of preparation to curate voices so that they will be clear, concise, and compelling. We typically will have 3 people on the panel, and we'll be the moderator. So it's not about us, it's about them. It's about highlighting and elevating other people in the community. People like to do that. And people like the variety of people that are speaking. So it's about facilitating people learning from one another, and that keeps people coming.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron and Joan. Are there any other questions that I don't think I see any other hands raised, but I want to make sure I'm not missing anyone. Are there any other questions before we sign off today?
Yes.
I heard someone say yes, but
It's me, Aubrey.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Aubrey. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to be here. With Dennis' conversation about the Catholic Church, and it's over the years, I just been asking a lot of questions and trying to tap into and build relationships and learn more about the Catholic community. So that was pretty good information. I was just curious about what's your experience has been with that relationship with the Catholic community? How that's been for you?
So are you asking what my personal relationship has been with it?
Yes,
Yeah. And so I happen to have been brought up Catholic, and I am a Protestant. I'm sorry, a practicing Catholic is what I wanted to say.
Okay.
And so I actually consider myself, I'm bilingual. I speak both Catholic and Protestant.
Okay.
And I think that's what's important, is not to be looking for the differences, but looking for the similarities. And at one point, I have to tell you, so my first passion is marriage, but my second passion is the ecumenical movement. And what I said at one point is, I said, if I wasn't involved in marriage ministry, I would probably be involved in the ecumenical movement. And then it occurred to me, the marriage ministry is the ecumenical movement. I mean, there is so much overlap, so much common alignment of interest there, that it can be the greatest opportunity to make the church one and make the church united and unified. And so that's where my coaching on it would be, is, and that's why I wanted to share really that the major theological difference that I would say is just whether you start with Ephesians 5:21 or 5:22. And I say that to say that's not a big deal. I mean, you have to respect where the differences are, but emphasize the commonality, emphasize the 90% commonality rather than the very minor differences that there may be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I would also say is when one of the comments that Jason said is bring somebody with you. And so one of the things you may want to be looking for is look within your community for Catholics that share a passion on it. And it would be a great meeting to have, is if you're the head of your local community marriage initiative and happen to be Protestant, is link up with a Catholic that has a passion for it, and have the two of you go in together. That can create a sense of common ground, oftentimes. It's not required, but it can be helpful.
Yeah, I asked that question because I don't like personally, I just don't like the thought when you hear us and them, some people that's maybe think different than you or believe different things than you, and I just try to think of us, and I was just wondering how, that's one of the questions I had. How does the Catholic community think? Do they, if I'm getting ready to approach them, will they see me as them or us or we, or if that question make any sense, as I'm about to approach? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's going to depend a lot upon you, and it's going to depend upon the individual Catholic pastor. I know that where I live in Northwest Florida, Panama City Beach, I work closely with, do I see him on call? With Logan Kelly. Logan just, showed up. Logan has taught Ventures in Marriage at my own home parish at St. John the Evangelist. And so it's knowing people. And so when I say knowing people, in other words, that the pastor had to get comfortable with who Logan was and get comfortable with the material. But right now, if we were offering a class at St. John and scheduling Logan, the pastor wouldn't have any problem with him coming in. So, but that can only because they've already gotten to know him. So, okay.
Thank you, Dennis. And that's a great question, Aubrey. Okay. Any other questions? Does anyone have any other questions for our guest speakers?
Actually, one other point I do want to make is is that one thing within our American culture is issues around same-sex marriage. And I just do want to let people know is the Catholic Church is not supportive of same-sex marriage. And so, I'm not trying to influence other people's thoughts on that, but that that may be a question that they may ask you. Is they may ask the question is, you know, where are you on same-sex marriage? And I just want you to know the answer from the Catholic tradition is going to be that the Catholic tradition is the more traditional approach of man and woman. So
Thank you, Dennis. Okay. Any other questions? Well, wonderful. Well, I think we are ready to wrap up. So if there are no other questions, we will go ahead and sign off for today. But you know, as we've mentioned, we thank you all for being here. We look forward to our monthly calls with you guys, and we will be posting this on our YouTube site. And I will go ahead and put my email address in the chat box. So if there's anything maybe you think of right after we sign off, or you know, you just like to connect, maybe we haven't met yet, I'd love to meet you and speak with you further. So again, just thank you all, and we will hopefully talk to you all soon. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Katie.
thanks, Katie. Thanks, Carl, for organizing it.
Thank you, everyone.